So welcome everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Bree and Megan. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Masada Tailu, and I'll be presenting with my colleague and mentor, Dr. Monica Cox. Our hosts provided a little bit of an introduction, so I'll provide just a little bit more context before we dive into today's session. So Dr. Cox and I met in 2017. So this session is going to be conversational, and it's going to essentially be like a podcast interview between Dr. Cox and I. And so in order to situate that conversation, I think a little bit of context would be helpful. And so just to let you all know, Dr. Cox and I met at ARA 2017 through a symposium titled Making Black Girl Magic Count in Mathematics and Engineering Education, a scholarly symposium who was organized, and that session was organized by Dr. Nicole Joseph at Vanderbilt University. So that was spring 2017. And about a year after that, I applied to work as a postdoctoral research associate during 2018-2019 for an NSF-funded study titled Why We Persist, an intersectional study to characterize and examine the experiences of women tenure-track faculty in engineering. So at the time that I met Dr. Cox, I was a doc student at the University of Denver. Then I applied to be a postdoc on her team. I was offered that position, so I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and I was in that postdoc position for a year, working under the guidance of Dr. Cox, as well as her co-PIs, Dr. Ebony McGee at Vanderbilt University, and Dr. Joyce Main at Purdue University. And while I was in that position, I went on the tenure track job market, and I was offered a position at Arizona State, where I currently am. That's a position I started in 2019. So while I no longer work formally for Dr. Cox as part of her research team at Ohio State, as you can all see, our research interests align pretty closely. And so I've stayed in touch with her, and I have the privilege and honor of continuing to work with her as we work on collaborative research. So that's just a little bit of background to explain how we met and how and why we continue to work together. So here on this slide, I provide an outline for today's session. So like I mentioned, it's going to be about a structured Q&A between the two of us. And then we'll provide space for audience engagement for about 20 minutes. And then we'll wrap up with a list of resources for institutional support strategies focused on women of color broadly, but Black women specifically. Even more specifically, and a closing slide that provides our contact information and the URL for the Why We Persist study website. So as we discuss, we'll frame each question in the context of reflections from Dr. Cox's individual perspective. We'll also draw from data from the Why We Persist study, and then also provide a little bit of greater context by touching on existing literature from engineering education and higher education as well. I know this is a lot of intro, but bear with me. Also, I think it's important to understand our methodological approach a little bit for how this conversation came about. So you can see and you've heard, we're two Black women who continue to work together in higher education. We are colleagues, we have a mentoring relationship, and we're also friends. So this type of pre-existing relationship makes this type of research more accessible, full of rapport, and frankly, just more enjoyable for the both of us. Additionally, it allows the tone of today's session to be more conversational. As we discuss, we'll be drawing from a variety of data sources, including personal reflections, current conversations, and a one-on-one interview conducted last year. It should be noted that the interview that was conducted last year was recorded and transcribed as part of the data for a book chapter for an edited volume about Black women's experiences in leadership in higher education that we were writing together. So when you see the questions on various slides moving forward, just know that they come from the questions and themes from that autoethnographic project that we are working on together. Additionally, the quotes also come from the interview transcript from that same project and interview. So think of this as like a part two. As we have worked together, we've also recognized the value of blogging and social media. So as Dr. Cox shares some of her other experiences, she'll also make connections to how these two technologies have expanded her platform and given her a space to forge community with other women of color in the field. Lastly, and I've mentioned this before, imagine today's session as a podcast episode with a listener section at the end, which will be the time for like audience engagement. And in this podcast episode structure, Dr. Cox is the subject and I will be the interviewer. Okay. So if I will keep an eye out for the chat box for any questions as we go along. Feel free to interrupt us if you can't hear or if there's like any accessibility issues. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead and get started. So my first question for you, Dr. Cox, is what sparked your interest in engineering and leadership?
Okay, so Dr. Halu, thank you so much for just setting up this conversation. My interest in leadership started a long time ago, and I think it's important as I talk about this to recognize that for many people who end up going into engineering and move into leadership, there is a focus on social justice. And many times you meet someone who sees you and sees a spark in you. And so I had several leaders who I engaged with. One was my Spelman College president, Dr. Johnetta B. Cole. And I went to an HBCU, which was an all-female HBCU, and seeing powerful women who were African American and who did not apologize for being bold, for being smart, and for knowing what they wanted to do inspired me to also be a leader. One of my mentors, Dr. Etta Faulkner, pulled me in her office one day and told me that I'd always underestimated myself. So because she saw my potential, I moved into engineering. And as I went into the classroom, the engineering education classrooms, I saw that there were not people like me, and I wanted to know why. So I wanted to have a voice in engineering because I wanted to see more women, and I wanted to see more women of color in engineering classrooms. I wanted to see more professors. I wanted to see more administrators, and I wanted to see people who were empowered in the same way that I saw the women at Spelman College who were inspired as well. And so I just always knew that this involved me being a leader. Changing the landscape involved leadership.
Thank you for sharing that. And what you have talked about is definitely aligned with some of the data that emerged from the Why We Persist study, in which we found how women described early academic self-efficacy, school, and familial support as really formative influences that shaped their interest in engineering. What's interesting, though, is that the process of navigating engineering becomes more arduous for women, particularly women of color and Black women specifically, the farther they get along in their career. And so we see, for example, in the empirical study published by Gibson and Espino in 2016, the authors found that among Black undergraduate women studying engineering, women often feel resigned about trying to prove themselves as competent engineers to their non-Black peers. Instead, they become more driven to serve as role models within their communities in an attempt to sort of push back against those stereotypes. And according to the most recent version of Engineering by the Numbers published by Roy in 2019, according to those estimates, as of fall 2018, women make up only 17.4% of all engineering faculty. And this is across levels. So this is 17.4 inclusive of full associate and assistant professors in engineering. Meanwhile, Black faculty, regardless of gender, make up only 2.4 of all faculty in engineering. So we see here that whether or not it is conceptualized as an engineering pipeline, pathway, or ecosystem, there's definitely a major structural problem that negatively impacts women, and Black women in particular, who may have lots of early aspirations to be in the engineering field.
And so, Dr. Hello, I do want to add one more statistic as well. And in part of the research that we're doing, we looked at data from ASEE, and until 2016, I believe that 91% of engineering departments that were reported in that database had no Black women in them. And I think that's very telling. That was only 4 years ago, and 91% did not have that representation. So I want to point out that there are people who may have interest in going into engineering or pursuing leadership, but when you are starting that journey, you don't realize that there are so few women. You may look and realize, well, maybe that's just my institution, but nationally, it's even more stark as you move into those faculty positions. And I think that's where this conversation today is also going, because I've realized it gets lonelier and lonelier when you have to move into spaces where you do not see people who look like you or people who maybe have had the same experience that you've had in engineering. Thank you.
Definitely, definitely. So this segues nicely into our next question, which is about the role of mentorship. So during our previous conversation and interview, you had mentioned that mentorship played a really important role in your professional leadership journey. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right. So I think we often use the term mentorship in a very loose way, but more so than mentorship, we need advocates. So we need people who will guide us, who will advise us, but people who will also sit at a table and speak on our behalf when decisions are being made. And I think I've been very fortunate to have people at every level of my life who have done that. One thing that I've seen that's very important as a Black woman engineering student and faculty now and former administrator is that you have people who don't look like you at the table. It is not possible to be successful in this field if you do not have, for me, if I did not have male advocates, if I did not have white advocates, if I did not have people who were of various ages and people who had different perspectives. That is what it takes to be successful. And what I found is that those mentors and advocates or sponsors were people with whom I could have frank conversations. So one person who has been amazing to me was a white male who is just very direct, and he's participated in a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion activities and positions. And he and I have had frank conversations about what it means to be a white man. We talk about privilege. We talk about just the experiences, even things such as like when I was having a child, what is it like to be a professor and to look at the stats where there are racial disparities in healthcare. So for me, mentorship has not just been having the mask and code switching, but the people with whom I consider myself to have strong mentor relationships are the people who are willing to have the tough conversations. And even if you look at today's society, the way that we are going to move ahead is to have exchanges where people can use the R word. They can say race, they can say racism, but we also have to have exchanges where people are willing to learn from each other. So those relationships are the best relationships for me, and they're the ones that have helped me to understand how my role in engineering is helping to make a difference. It helps me to be authentic and real also.
Definitely. And I think while having same race and same gender mentors and advocates definitely is meaningful and necessary because of obvious reasons, right? Like because of the way that you navigate spaces and like how your race and your gender impacts them. Just statistically, we see that there's not going to be a lot of Black women who are available in the field, right? So it's really important that other people also step up and do that sort of mentoring and advocacy work. So when we compare your individual experiences to what we found in the WWP study and the Why We Persist study, we see that participants mentioned that mentoring from peer colleagues, supportive deans, and department chairs seemed like a very formative and important source of mentorship for them. And so they often talked about, so and so who's been a full professor in my college for the past 30 years has always stood up for me and, has made me aware of policies and cultures that I was previously not privy to. The women in our study also talk about professional associations quite a bit and what role those networks play in retaining them and providing mentoring information. Interestingly, when we compare this to Crawford and Smith, they define mentoring as the sharing of power, information, and self. And in their study of African American women administrators in higher education, Black women often do not receive the mentorship they need from people who are more senior than them. In their study, the Black women participants mentioned how they did not receive the benefits of being in a situation where their leadership ability was cultivated. They had, in essence, been educated but not and trained but not nurtured. And so I think, Dr. Cox, your experiences with advocacy also aligns really closely with their notion of nurturing, right? So leaders need to be nurtured. They don't just emerge or just pop up. They need to be trained and corrected and given opportunities, and information needs to be shared with them. Meanwhile, Patton in 2009 shared that Patton in 2009 advocates for increased mentorship for Black women in higher education so that they themselves can serve as mentors to others and create beneficial networks that help us move closer toward equity. So a lot of this for me spotlights the need for care and nurturing in environments that are often wrought with emotional hurt and trauma. And so I'd be curious next if you could share a little bit more about what you have observed about emotional hurt and trauma in higher education and how that's shaped your journey also.
Wow. So this question is the most, I guess, revealing question. And I think it's most personal for me. And the word that I've used, and the word that I used in our interview was brokenness. There's a lot of hurt in higher education. And there's a lack of trust, I think, many times that we as women of color or Black women have. And I think that sometimes people, as I mentioned here, have good intentions, but everyone is not going to listen when you tell them that their actions harm you or that something is not beneficial for you. They may not respect your boundaries. And many people might say, well, Monica, you're an N of one. And I often see in environments, people will say, well, if you're the only one, I've never heard that before. Or, you're just emotional, or you're misunderstanding. But when I talk to other women who would not dare come before you and have a recorded seminar, or people who would not tweet, people who would not share this, I am telling you that people are broken. I am telling you that there are tears, and there is it is terrible to see this. I consider all women to be my sisters, but when I see it in my women of color sisters, and I know that there is nothing I can do because I operate in a system where I too do not have power, that is problematic for me. There are moments when you feel as if you have been violated, and there are moments when you hope that you end up on the other side of academia as a whole person. You hope that you have enough left for your family so that every scar and everything that has happened to you does not does not disable you permanently. There are people who cannot even talk about what they go through. They don't know how to reflect on it. And people think it's normal to be treated a certain way. And it just continues to happen. So if you look at the hashtags right now, Black in the Ivory, today, you're looking at the hashtags, you're looking at racism, that is bubbling up And people are so relieved to have visibility to situations that have been happening for years. When you look at engineering, when I read Lorraine Fleming's work, these are Black women who've written about their situations. Karen Butler Purry at Texas A&M, Christine Grant, North Carolina State University. When you hear it, the stories today are the same ones you heard 40 years ago, and you wonder why is this not changing? Why is the culture the same? Why are women who have so many diversity programs and resources and opportunities and grant funding, why are we still going through the trauma that has been prevalent since we have been tracking numbers of women of color? And what I can say is that people want change. And when individuals are asking what we can do now, we are saying that we want real conversations. We want people to listen to us. We want people to really do something about it. With the nurturing, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I want to be treated with respect. And in the words of civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. We're competent, but we're tired. And that's the trauma. And it's sad. And we just want someone to listen, someone to respond, someone to care, someone to help stop what is going on in higher education. So
Thank you for sharing that, Monica. I think for me, as someone who is at the very beginning of my academic career, one thing that has stunned me from the time that I was a postdoc on the team is how universal this is across the board. So when I would be on the team and I would go to different campuses to interview women of color, we would see, regardless of institution, regardless of level, regardless of geographic location, like these issues that Dr. Cox mentions are pretty consistent, right? So these notions of a woman of color tax, right? So being heavily burdened for institutional requests and administrative duties that are related to diversity and inclusion, all falling on like the sole woman of color in any given department. Challenges in the classroom. So, right, so being presumed incompetent in the classroom by your students, or having students push back against your authority or your syllabus in a way that is not present for other faculty. And when it comes to research that dates back to the 1980s, Mosley, for example, shows us how there are in the 80s, there were relatively few Black women administrators in higher education. And Mosley shares that Black women occupy positions that are outside the main structure of the university. They have little, if any, power. Many receive little or no support from their peers, Black or white. They are underpaid and overworked. The disillusionment with higher education has led many to indicate their intentions to leave their positions. So that was from an article published in the 1980s. And more recently, as of 2019, Dr. Brittany Williams has extensively researched the push out of Black women administrative professionals in higher education today. So as you alluded to, Dr. Cox, I think for me, the most disheartening part about all of this is that none of this is new, and it seems to just evolve. Like the underlying issues remain the same. They just have evolved and come out in new ways that circumvent any like superficial D&I initiatives. You know what I mean? Um, so this type of peer-reviewed research is corroborated through anecdotal evidence, like Dr. Cox shared on social media, with hashtags like the Black and the Ivory, that spotlight how Black students, faculty, and administrators who encounter macro and microaggressions consistently within institutions. And this is definitely something that's found in engineering in particular, and I think is exacerbated by just like the demographic disparities that exist.
yeah, I want to follow up on that also because my colleague, so I'll acknowledge her, Dr. Carlotta Berry, and I were talking about this. And when you look at the hashtags, people in engineering are not talking about what is happening to us. And I think there are so few of us that many of us would not dare share anything, on social media. We want to become a part of a movement. because I think retaliation is very real, and that's a conversation that needs to happen. And something that I would point out is that many people would talk about, us sharing things publicly, like we're airing dirty laundry. But in talking to some more of my colleagues, I realized that they are telling people that changes need to be made. And when changes are not made, they are looking for other ways to get information out. And I think we as a community need to do more and do better about supporting people who are exposing issues that will cause trauma, and not punishing those people who report that. I think that there are also discrepancies um, in reporting by race. So, you many times Black women are not believed when they say that there's a situation. You collect data after data, and before you know it, either their instances are ignored, or um, they're discredited, and that is disheartening as well. So I just want to close that out as we talk about emotional hurt and trauma. And I think that there just needs to be a space for women to heal from that.
Absolutely. And one of the ways that you have shared with me that that happens for you is through spirituality. And so, and this is just something that emerged during our previous conversation. So, could you answer for me, how has spirituality shaped your leadership, and sort of helped you survive in environments that otherwise are quite dehumanizing?
Right. So I'm not trying to preach here. I know maybe people would see spirituality and say that, I'm about to go there. But I think that spirituality also represents that balm, that healing balm, whatever it may be for many people. And that could be acupuncture, it could be meditation, it could be, exercise or something. But for me, growing up in Alabama, in the South, coming from a background with families who were very focused on faith, that is something that um, I had to dig into, because it helps me to still see the goodness in people. Because there is, some people may call me very naive, and that's a question that I had recently when people ask, um, what do I wish that I had known, as an administrator, as a person in this field. And I do think that because of my upbringing, I thought that people were fair. I thought that, everyone wanted us all to be equal. That, when you think about the Constitution, we are all created equal. We are not, I'm not 3/5 of a person anymore. My spirituality has helped ground me and helped me to focus on something that is bigger than I am. And I think for many people, you're looking for answers. You try to understand why people would treat you a certain way. Why are you not being treated um, in an equitable way? And for me, I had to really dig into a power that was deeper than myself, because that is what keeps me going. That keeps me from retaliating, that keeps me from breaking down. And I just want to say, and how you translate this, people have to find that for themselves. You have to see yourself, and I think as a Black woman, you have to see yourself as more than your job, because if your job defines you, you will think you are trash. You have to see yourself as the mother, the daughter, the entrepreneur, the amazing scholar. You have to see yourself holistically, because the value that is often placed on Black women in engineering is just not there. And it's a sad thing to say, and I hope that things will change in my lifetime, but our voices are not heard. And it is very demoralizing in that way. So that's where my spirituality comes in. At the end of the day, I just have to believe, um, that there is a higher calling, there's a greater purpose for what is happening and for what people have to go through. I hope people are listening. I hope that changes will be made, and I hope that it's worth it at the end of the day. Yeah, that's it.
Right. That is, that's hard to hear, but it's definitely not singular. So so to bring this back to and I think what I really want to reiterate to our audience is that while we're framing this session through the perspective of like spotlighting, right, spotlighting and using a magnifying glass on one person's individual experience, this is definitely just like a narrative corollary to what's happening to a lot of people. So we see in our Why We Persist findings that women of color who persist in their tenure track appointments often have a sense of deeper spiritual purpose, and that helps them sort of bear with and move past lots of the structural issues that would otherwise really keep them out of the academy. They also tend to identify a harmony between their home and work life, which is often facilitated by a supportive partner and spouse who's also in academia, right? So a lot of things have to align really well for women of color to stay, just because of the many structural things that would otherwise push them out. I want to also situate this in light of existing scholarship about spirituality in higher ed. So for example, Stewart in 2010 shows how spirituality supports Black students' persistence. And almost a decade later, in 2018, McGuire writes about how religion continues to matter in Black undergraduate students' lives, despite their lack of affiliation and engagement with institutionalized faith organizations. And so if we consider the environments that are oftentimes like I said, like dehumanizing to people, I think it makes a lot of sense that people of color and Black people in particular would often cling to spirituality, myself included, as a way to feel whole again, in places where you're invisible or just treated poorly, in many ways. And so as we wrap up the Q&A portion, Monica or Dr.
Oh,
Cox.
excuse me, just one second. So I want to follow up with you for just a moment, because I think too that when we talk about retention, that's the thing that I kind of want to mention with this. So often we talk about recruitment of faculty, and everyone's on that bandwagon. Recruit the faculty. I'll keep it to Black women. Recruit Black women, but it's so hard to retain. And some of the things that I'm talking to you about now come back to issues of retention, because I'll admit, like, even where I am as a full professor, I'm about to become an ASWE fellow. Thank you, everyone who who voted for me. But given my experience, I've been in this field 15 years. There are people on the other side who will say, well, goodness, you don't have good experiences anywhere. Like, maybe it's you're the problem. And I promise you, I get, gaslighting is real. And I just think about being at peace. And someone would say, you're at this place in your life, full professor, tenured, your future is so bright in engineering education, presidential awardee, whatever it is. You could Google all those things, all the successes. But yeah, I'm willing to leave. I am willing to leave. And it's like, why would you be willing to leave, Monica Cox? Because I want peace. I have a 19-month-old child, and it took many years for me to have a child. And I just think about him growing up. And I said, I don't want my child to have a broken mother. And so I'm just, trying to figure out in my life, what is more important to me? And can the academy change enough for me to be able to speak my truth, like I'm speaking my truth here, and to receive it without someone trying to break me for having this truth and for expressing what I think needs to be a change. And like I said, so many people would just leave. They would not tell you this. It would just be like, oh, I saw Monica. Here's the webinar. This is what she talked about. It's the face. It's the face that we put on, the mask that we put on. But someone needs to hear the truth. And I hope that for someone who's on this call, you remember what I say and you think it's not about the success. It's not about the fact that you can't do the work. It's the fact that you want to be respected and you want to be whole in that space where you do the work, because regardless of what people say, it breaks you down. It tears you down, and you have to be whole. That is what life is about. You don't want to die and not be whole. You don't want to be broken. So, this is too real, too real. I did not expect this to come out of me today, but you need to see that this is real. This is not fake. This is not a show. And if I can speak for the women who don't have the ability to speak, hear me, hear me. With all the risks that are associated with what I am telling you, hear what I am telling you, because the Academy has to do better. They have to do better. So pause. So keep going.
Thank you. And thank you for your vulnerability, right? It takes a lot to share all of this. And, I hope that people recognize how much it costs you and other Black women to share this publicly. It's not like a fun thing to talk about. So thank you for your vulnerability for the sake of other people, and hopefully making this whole journey a little bit easier for someone else who comes behind you. As we close up the Q&A session, one thing I did want to touch on was this notion of feedback. So this is something that I learned many things from you during my postdoctoral appointment, but one thing for sure that sticks out in my mind is that you drilled in me the importance of getting feedback early and often, and asking for it, even if it's not offered by my department chair or dean or whatever, to ask for it, just because you don't want to be caught off guard when it comes time for evaluation. And so my next question for you then is, what role does feedback play in leadership? And both when you get feedback from others, and when you provide others feedback during your past 4 years as a department chair, what have your experiences been, and what lessons have you learned about this?
Okay. So I think that this is the common theme. When I think being a woman of color in leadership, and maybe it's my personality, I don't know, it could be the authenticity part, but I think that it's important. Like, if you're going to make any organization better, you need to at least have that space where you can break some things down. You can be vulnerable in whatever position you have, or whatever you had prior to coming in with someone. Like, you need to be able to keep things real. And I think that when we talk about feedback, you have to see it as a way to make yourself to become better. And so often we see it from the perspective of um, supervisor, supervisee. But I think in our mentoring relationships, we need to understand that someone telling you that you need to do better is not meant to hurt you. It is meant to help you. And that's framed within the context of race even today. Like, I want to talk about the feedback. So what's a tangible thing that I could tell you? If you're an administrator and you ask someone to come into your office, a person of color, a Black woman, like, what's your experience? If this person responds the way that I do, then what are you going to do? I think the first thing that people want to do is get defensive and say, that's not true. No one's ever told me that before. But you recognize that that person has a voice, and what they are experiencing is real to them. And in leadership, you don't always hear what you want to hear, but to become a better leader, you do take into consideration what people are saying. And at the end of the day, you may have to make a decision that does not align with what that person said, but being open and transparent means everything, because a person feels that they are heard. And that comes back to inclusivity. We're often not inclusive because of pride, because we are afraid of what we're going to look like if people know that we got it wrong. And as a leader, feedback helps you to try to do better. Yes, you may have done something incorrectly in the past. Maybe you didn't listen, but starting today, you're going to do better. So seek that feedback from people, and grow from it, from all perspectives.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is something, again, once again, that our participants from the Why We Persist study brought up as well. The women who viewed and surveyed in our study talked about how, again, professional networks through professional associations and faculty mentoring at their home institutions were valuable sources of feedback. Aldersleet has also written about how diligent department chairs must be to deliver useful and equitable performance ratings to faculty in their department or program. And I'm sure, this comes as no surprise to anyone on this call, but there's an abundance of literature that talks about when it comes to student evaluations, how women of color are disproportionately, and people of color writ large, are disproportionately graded low when it comes to student evals, right? And so it's not just the student thing, right? So how do your peers evaluate you? How does your person and your supervisor evaluate you? All of these interactions are raced and they're gendered, and so people in leadership, like Dr. Cox's models, need to think about how this needs to be more equitable and useful for the growth of the person you're providing feedback to, and also the people you're receiving feedback from. I know we're running, close to the end in terms of the session, and we're going to have to truncate our Q&A. Just realize that you can also always reach out afterwards. We'll provide our contact information as well. So as we wrap up the session, we just wanted to make sure to include a what's next, right? Something actionable. So when we were preparing for the Dr. Cox, mentioned to me, we have to provide the audience members with something that they can use moving forward, right? It can't just be the narratives themselves. So this is a truncated version of a toolkit that was developed by Dr. Cox and her colleague, Dr. Lauren Thomas Quigley. And I'll let you, Monica, share a little bit about what these three categories are and what you would like audience members to leave with as they go back into their regular day-to-day lives at work.
Right. So thank you so much. So yeah, this is just something that came up when um, my colleague and I were talking about our expectations, and if we could create something for someone where they just needed to know the basics, what would the basics be? So I have this, and then there's another slide that I'll show you in a moment. But we just want people to know that these are like basics, so to speak, and it may seem that this always happens, but it's not. Like, we are not often in places where we are safe. And people may ask, well, what does safety mean? It means being able to speak up without fear of retaliation. We want to have a seat at the table. We want someone to tell us if we're doing something incorrectly or if we need to change so that we can grow. We want someone to not ignore us if we have a complaint. We also want people to change. It's not just on us to change, but maybe an organization needs to change, maybe a leader needs to change. And we want to be listened to in the same way that you listen to people who you consider to be important. We want to be nurtured and or supported as well. And so that could be fiscal support. It could be just so many different ways of support. We want to be acknowledged. We want to be presumed competent. We're not always the diversity hire. There's nothing wrong with diversity, and there's nothing wrong with hiring a diverse candidate. But we don't want to always want it to be assumed that that's the only reason we're there, that we're only included on diversity, equity, inclusion committees. We also want to be trusted, and we want to be retained, as I mentioned before. And so what can you do? You can educate yourself. You can be, an ally and or an advocate, a sponsor, a coach, an advocate. Don't say one thing to our face and then something else behind our backs. Really tell us the truth. Don't retaliate against us when we tell you the truth. Give us constructive feedback, and do not undermine us to protect yourself, because that is one of the ultimate betrayals. Next, please. So I also, did we have the... Yes. So in terms of there are some additional resources. These are all over the place for different things. Like, I have a website. I have just a little excellent book that I wrote after my father passed away, and it's just kind of just some standard norms of excellence. I have a book called Demystifying the Engineering PhD, which is my academic scholarship. But I also wanted to share this Respect Women of Color, and I can really go into more detail later, but it just provides just our expectations. So I want to leave time for questions, please.
Thank you, Monica.
Mhm.
Alrighty. So we'll at the end we'll just go back to this slide. There's our contact information and also the URL to the project, the Why We Persist project study if you're interested in learning more about that. But we don't have a ton of time for audience questions, but feel free to put them in the chat box or ask them out loud and I can stop.
So we do have one question from Brian, and he asked, as an advocate, what are good ways to point out an instance to a colleague who wants data without singling out an individual and making them feel worse? It's from Brian Helmke.
So I think I need just a little bit of clarification. So, because I know I was talking and maybe I don't remember what I said, but to a colleague, they need data about the person, like why diversity is important.
Not just that, but I realized after typing the question in the chat box that out of context, it doesn't always carry the full meaning. So I think you were talking about cases where, as one of the minority in a department of, maybe mostly, white or mostly white male colleagues, that you might feel singled out, or might feel like, as you were just saying, as the diversity hire, for example. So in a case where I'm thinking in particular of instance advocating for students, where there's only a couple of Black students among a bigger group, for example. And so I've run into cases where if I try to point out that a particular thing that we want to do is maybe singling out those individuals, I've run into a roadblock where we need data, or we need, some sort of survey or something. But I feel like in many cases that just reinforces singling them out and pointing out, making them feel worse about the situation. And so I'm curious
Absolutely.
whether your experiences or your research suggest strategies that could be alternatives to a survey, or just singling out those individuals for their opinions to explain themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not very easy to address this particular situation. I think that's where the trust kind of comes in a little bit. Like if someone is telling you something, then what reason would they have to initially lie or say that something negative is going on? And so I think that it's a shift in mindset, and people need to listen. Once again, I've said that numerous times now, but what I want to say, even in your role, is that it may be uncomfortable for you to maybe push with those people, but I think that's how racism and oppression happens, when people are saying they're dismissing, what someone else is saying. And so you have to say, well, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's explore it. There's nothing wrong with, investigating this or trying something out. Like, you in your position can be a voice to say, I understand that you're skeptical, but let's see if there's something to this. Like, sometimes you just have to push forward and say, we're going to try something without the data also, because there's something that's spurring this person to say something. And it's hard. I admit that. It is. So there's also some things in the chat that might help you as well. Okay, go ahead. Other questions or comments?
Feel free to put your questions in the chat, or you could turn on your mic for a brief question.
So I was just to follow on what people are saying about people remarking that, well, that's just your story. One of the things we know about power structures is that often a powerful person will pick certain people to be rude to, and they will not do it in the presence of others. And so it really doesn't matter in an organization if one person is being mistreated. a lot of times the person doing the mistreating does not have a pattern across the board. And we see that in abusive situations in lots of different settings. So I think it's really important to recognize that one person may treat certain people one way and certain people others. And you really do need to believe people, like Dr. Cox was saying, when they tell you this person has mistreated me.
Exactly. Thank you. Because you think about yourself, if you were going through a situation, wouldn't you want to be listened to as well? And so it's the whole humanity part of it where you hear people out. Don't give someone's voice, don't amplify one voice over another. And, one thing that I often said as an administrator, even when it came to money, because people can understand money, if someone asked me for $20,000, if 20 people asked me for $20,000, would I be able to give that to them? And if I would be able to only give it to one person, but not give someone else that amount, then there's that disparity. And so we need to try and look at it, even when we talk about treatment. If someone's filing a complaint, are we listening to one person? But if everyone, are you going to listen to the 20 complaints? Yes. Do it all or none. And that's the standard that you should, go by, live by, I think. And I just want to make one other quick comment. People have asked me about racism, and they're like, is this person racist? So let's put that out there. I think when you talk about racism, you're also talking about equity and inequities. And is someone not being treated a certain way and someone else is being treated a certain way? So we need to really not look at it as just a literal thing, but now you're able to see differences in treatment. So I may have gone over. I'm going to pass it back over.
Thank you.
So,
So I was just going to say, so unfortunately, I think we're out of time, but I was just going to go back to just our PowerPoint for just a second so that, and I think this will be posted as well. But here is our contact information. If you also want to learn more about the study where I was a postdoc and Dr. Cox is still the PI, it's whywepersist.com. It's an NSF funded project. And then obviously our email and website information is also here. So with that, I can stop sharing and hand it over to you, Megan and Brief, to close this out.
Thank you so much, Drs. Cox and Hailu. We really appreciate you taking the time to, one, share your story and connecting it back to your work. We are open to continuing the conversation if other people have any other questions, if they are available to share a couple of more minutes. But before we continue with the Q&A, I would like to just say that we do have another session coming up next week, and we'll be talking about expanding resources that connect diversity, equity, access, and inclusion with ethics education. So go to our website and register. But if you have any other questions, feel free to jump in. I think I saw something in the chat box.
Yes, I'm willing to stay. This is my work. This is my life. This is why I'm here. This is my purpose. So I'm here to help. Thank you.
excellent. What other questions do you all have? You can just turn your mic on and ask.
I'm not sure if Suzanne is still on the call, but she said, are you still here?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Do you want to talk about your question?
Sure. As you were talking about spirituality, I was thinking of all the sort of tools in the toolkit we have to approach that equilibrium or calm, or, part of the question is what is that emotional balance that you're looking for? But I was wondering, I've been reading about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, and how important that would be for students being successful in STEM, and the way we approach thinking not only about our abilities in math, but in navigating the emotional storms, the microaggressions, the 1,000 cuts. So is something like growth mindset, a useful tool in the toolkit?
I would say so. And by the way, I do have a colleague at Ohio State, Emily Dringenberg, who is doing some work in that for students looking at their growth mindset in engineering. And I think that, yeah, we are talking about that. Like there is something about this flexibility, this openness. If you look even at COVID-19 and everything that we've had to do to kind of change and be flexible, I think that that's coming back to also that growth mindset and that ability to adapt. And I mean, I think, yes, you can use that in a variety of settings. And you can couple that with other things, like when you're looking at exposure, one's exposure to different cultures, and willingness to engage with those cultures. Like, there are a variety of frameworks, but absolutely, I think that the core of that comes back to, just a willingness to learn and to be flexible and open. I was thinking about something else, and it'll come to me in a minute. So I'm sorry, I lost my thought. But I know what it is. It's about power. I did not talk about power before, but if we're talking about what I've seen over and over, there's also this fear of a loss of power. And when you think about, women of color coming into the environment, many times people will say, well, they think that they have to give something up for women of color to get access. And we need to start thinking about what it looks like for all of us to participate. And that's the fear that many people have about inclusivity. So I think it's a false perception. And of course, it's easy for me to say it as someone who does not have perceived power, in a system. But I think there's that risk taking that has to happen. What if you do allow, someone like me to say something? What if you allow me to lead and now you're the person who's listening to me? Like, do you think that I'm going to take something from you? Do you think I'm going to retaliate? And that's a completely different conversation as well, where I think sometimes people think that, as people of color, we're just waiting for a chance to get power because we're about to like knock the whole system down and just send everybody to another place. And I promise you, and my friend, I don't know if she's still on here, but we had this, if I can speak politically, when the election came with President Obama, you saw that more people were buying guns. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I think that when you are in a mindset where you don't know what it's like to not be in that position of power, you may think that people are plotting, to retaliate. And that is not what we're doing at all. When I think about the people of color I know, we're just trying to live. Look at police brutality, look at what's happening right now. So I'm not thinking about who I'm going to kill up, who I'm going to bomb. Like, that is a false narrative. And we could go on and on about that, but I'm just saying it is the mindset, getting back to what you said and how we're thinking. Was that a little bit too much? You told me to be real. I need a check, like check, bring it down. That was too much.
Not at all.
There's another question. Oh, did you see it? Go ahead.
Sure. So there is one other question, and so it's coming from Keisha, and they ask, is there a way to connect Black students in engineering at PWIs for them to gain support and know that they are not alone? So the example of NSBE is provided, but are you aware of any others?
I know NSBE is primarily like one of the big ones. I think that there are often minority engineering programs that are available, but in terms of formal organizations, like there's the student organization, and like I said, on campus programs that are available for students. So could I ask you a little bit, tell me more. I feel like I'm missing something. If you would be comfortable saying a little bit more about to gain support and know they are not alone. Like, we know a little bit about what they're experiencing, but I want to know more details about what you mean by gaining support, like whether it's a faculty thing or something else. that you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. So at my institution, there are, we do have a NESB student org. So the students across campus are aware of each other, but we're an institution in Ohio. So we're also aware of other universities that are PWIs that have Black students. And I think there's, I'm always looking for ways for them to connect to each other, because even in our own institution, we have a small group of African-American girls. So if they knew that there was other groups of Black female engineering students at Ohio State or at UC, or like if there was a broader network that they could connect into, like I was just wondering if that was something that was out there.
Right. So I'm seeing some other comments too, and some people are echoing the MEP programs, and then some of the other peer mentorship efforts. But what I am seeing across the board at all levels, students, faculty, staff, etc., is that there is not a good way for people to connect across institutions, and I think that there's an opportunity for virtual communities to be created. Zoom is amazing at this moment because the very way that we needed to connect is the only way that we can connect sometimes in these small communities. And so I'm finding that I'm having more conversations with people just because I was so busy and I got caught up in my institution. But I think that you're going to have to establish this, using Facebook groups, using different platforms. There's a need for this because you're seeing, even with Twitter and with the hashtags, like that's what's happening too. What you were talking about is a way for people to form community. There's a hunger for that at this moment. So I think it's not there, but it should be. What does the +1 mean? I missed that, by the way. What is that?
Like thumbs up.
Oh.
It's like a yes,
Okay, that's cute, because I was just thinking, like, is a guest coming in? Are they inviting people? I don't know what's going on. I got very confused. So thank you for explaining that. But, I'm available if anyone wants to talk.
What else is on your mind?
I'm just wondering, I want to hear what people are thinking. Like, I talked about the feedback part. I put a lot out there. I had a little tear. I did some other stuff. It was a little dramatic. Talked about everything that I wasn't supposed to. We hit everything: race, religion, government, everything. So is everybody okay? Like, what are y'all going to do? I need to know some action items. Like, what's going to happen as a result of this conversation? Like, are y'all, what's going to happen? What's next? I need to see the other side of what's going to happen from this. Like, was this worth it for you? What'd you get out of it?
Monica, I've been to a lot of Zoom meetings and webinars and different things offered. Hands down, this is the best one I have been to since the pandemic started. You and Meseret did a great job, and I appreciate it. So that's not an action item, but yay.
Thank you. So when I may be looking for that next job, let's remember that and pump it up so I can get paid. Thank you. You're so nice. I need to connect with you. Thank you so much. Encouragement.
Well, I think we do need to connect. I run a leadership program at the University of Oklahoma, and we have a professional mentorship program. So much of the stuff that you said about mentorship and connecting and how important it is to not just have a mentor, but also have a sponsor for engineering students really spoke to my heart. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much. It was like air kiss. Thank you so much. Somebody asked, I'm sorry, that was a private thing. So for the person who sent this to me privately, yes, I have a baby and he's cute. And I was like, hold on, I don't want you to see my junky office. Hold on, I'll show you real quick. So this will be on the recording, but let me stop my video so you don't see me in my junky office, but I'll be right back. Hold on.
And Megan.
So I'm back.
Okay.
Now go ahead, Maz. Also,
if the PowerPoint, will the PowerPoint be posted as well? I'm sure you already answered this.
I can post it if you're willing to share it, but I don't, that's up to you.
Sure. You know what I'll do? Instead of maybe sending you like the whole PowerPoint, I'll send you the toolkit that was developed by Monica
Great.
and then our contact information like in the same document, and we can send it out.
Perfect. That'd be great.
So I was just showing you really quickly. Somebody asked me about my child. So yes, so this is my child. Like, I'm a human. I don't know if you can see him, but this was when he was 1. So I had him as a department chair, and so that's a whole different discussion. I feel that, you know, we could talk about, a future topic, you know, when you're looking at motherhood, you're looking at people who have to balance that. I think that's something I realized, that many people don't expect senior administrators to have children. And so when you're talking about like running an organization, but also having a child, there's that, there are policies that just are not there either. So many times, you know, assistant professors are the ones having kids, grad students are the one having kids. But when you're a tenured full professor and you have a child, what does that mean? So my Zoom meetings have been very interesting because my child's everywhere. So that's something too. Some other things, you know, I really want to end maybe with just some action items, because people are once again asking like what people can do. And I think that if you are an administrator, you know, people want to see more than just words. You know, I've looked at so many statements and it's like, we stand with you. And, you know, we know that this is going on, but it's going to stop. But people want to know how. They want to know what you're going to do. And one of the things that I've also learned as an administrator is that you need to follow the money. What's important to people? When I look at people, particularly in engineering, if they are putting money into an effort, and when I say money, it's like faculty lines, resources, diversity, equity, and inclusion training, you know, things that are very tangible. That is what matters, and that's what's going to stand out. You know, looking at ways to eliminate some of the issues with student evaluations, knowing that people are promoted in that way. So what are you doing to combat that? What are you doing to level the playing field when it comes to how we are supported as women of color? And I will say, and on Twitter, I think my Twitter was wrong, but it's at Dr. Monica Cox. You like put your money where your mouth is. And I talked about data, and, you know, Megan, Dr. Pollock, you wrote about this. You know, I don't want to hear just air mess. I don't want to hear fluffy stuff. I want to see diversity numbers. I want to see who's at your table. Do you have people of color at your table? If you have 50 people on your executive council and the only Black person is your chief diversity officer, I have a problem with that, because you're telling me that in engineering or in department chairs, you know, anyone who's a department chair, there is no one who is eligible, no one who's competent enough, no one who has even been attracted to your environment to come and sit there. Because that's another thing too. Another thing is that we as faculty talk. If I am disrespected, people in the community are going to say, don't participate in that. Don't go there. Diversity is not real. And that's why you sometimes don't see cohorts of people, you know, in engineering. And I just think, I know that we have to do better. I know we do. And I am concerned about the younger people when I see grad students and when I see junior faculty who were protected from what is really happening, you know, racially, what's happening from an oppression perspective, and they come into the academy and they're saying, wow, this is awful. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, that is the story that I continue to hear over and over. And someone has to be bold enough to say that it's going to stop, because it is abuse. In the same way that, I mean, I mentioned it, you're talking about battery, you're talking about exploitation, you know, we're talking about a lot of things that would be considered criminal in our world. You know, you don't just slap somebody, but you're slapping them when you say certain things to them. You know, you are abusing them. You know, you're dismissing them. Those are things you don't do. And I think it's a larger conversation that we're having in our country right now. Like, that's why a movement is happening. And I think this is one of the last things I will say. It comes back to leadership. when you talk about a movement has a leader. When you look at Martin Luther King, when you're looking at people who have risked it all, they know that it's going to be uncomfortable. They know that they may lose power, they may lose their titles, they may lose their reputations, but we don't have enough people in engineering who are willing to risk that for the cause. And I think once you have some individuals who stand up and say, I understand that I'm a president of this university, but if things don't change, then I can't be here anymore. That's risk taking. That's true leadership, because you are saying that you are going to put your privilege out there to change a system for people who may not have a voice. And you do not see that. I see a lot of folks who are getting their paychecks, a lot of people who want to ascend to next level positions. But if you ask them what they are willing to put out there so that everyone in their organization is included and has a voice and can really succeed, they're not responding. Pay attention to that. Hold them accountable. That's it for me. Sorry, Megan.
Well, I want to ask a question on that. So one of the things I've really sort of come to focus on this year specifically is the idea of position, not necessarily positionality, but I recognize power and privilege, but it's learning to recognize, when do I need to get out of the way and to push women and people of color into those positions, so that they get all of the things that you're talking about. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's sort of bridging what you were just saying and some ideas on when we need to be the white advocates and when we need to shut up and sit the hell down.
Wow. That's interesting. So the best way I can answer, and go with me to see if I'm talking about what you're talking about, I think there's this partnership piece. Like, you want to always think about how, like, you're now using your privilege to help someone else, but you want to make sure that you're not harming that person by, like, undermining the person. Like, there are things that you can say to put them in a situation where someone can get angry. So I'll just use me as an example. So as a leader, like, yes, I can be a department chair, but there might be people who are angry that I'm a department chair. Like, it's like, why am I listening to you? And someone could have placed me in that position, but they need to be present when some of the other situations, the backlash, the issues, the undermining is happening. Like, they also need to be in the room when those conversations are occurring that will undermine my leadership. So I think you go in and out of what your role is, depending upon how people are engaging with that person who you're an advocate for, but I think it's very hard, and I've seen it, where you don't want to have anyone come against you in the same way that they'll come against that person, but you have to decide as a person if you're willing to stand in the gap for that individual, because it's hard. And one thing that I even talked to one of my white female colleagues about is this idea of sisterhood, so to speak. And I feel like this is a different topic. We need to have a conversation with white women and Black women, particularly, but sometimes the sisterhood is real. Like, when I think about just understanding that, like, as a Black woman, I've got my sister's back no matter what, because there are so few of us. Like, I'm cheering her on. When I talked to my white female colleague, she was saying that sisterhood is not always understood in the white female community. And so, I don't know, but, it's like, I feel that when I see anyone who's like Michelle Obama, I don't know Michelle Obama, but I celebrate her as a Black woman because I know how difficult it is for her to do what she does. And I think, to answer your question, it's almost like you have to have that sisterhood mentality. It's that thing where it's like, I'm standing here for you, and it may be uncomfortable, and it may be so easy for me to slip back into a place of privilege, but I'm still standing here for you. Like, I know it's hard, but I'm going to take some of those scars with you. And I think that means a lot. And we need to start teaching people how to do that, because otherwise you feel very abandoned. And it starts to weigh on you. And that's also something too. It's like the person who was there to help you starts feeling like an enemy.
Okay.
That was long. Did that
Monica,
answer your question?
I wanted to
Yes.
I wanted to kind of answer that question as well.
Okay.
I had a microaggression happen to me at work. And one of my coworkers, who was a white female ally, she came to me, she noticed, and she asked me, could she address it publicly? And I told her, no, I'll handle it, you know. And she didn't wait for me to handle it, and she did it publicly in front of the faculty. And so at that point, I felt like the microaggression was less than what she did, because she took my voice and she took my authority. So I just think it's important to, if you're going to do that, go to the person and say, are you comfortable with me addressing this, or would you like to address it? Because I don't want to take your voice. And sometimes, especially when you don't have tenure yet, they're probably gonna be like, oh, thank you so much, because I don't have tenure. But what she did was actually worse than what the person had done, because now everyone was coming to me like, oh my God, poor dear, you felt you couldn't tell anybody. And so I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And remember what I said before about being able to handle it. Like it's the constructive feedback. It may make you uncomfortable, but you have to figure out how you're going to respond. And I think it goes to that next thing of privilege too, because in a system, I read a book about this too. Like, someone is more likely to listen to the woman that did that to Carlotta than to Carlotta. So if it was head to head, it's like, well, goodness, Carlotta's just hypersensitive. And then that's just a mess. And so you also want to check yourself so that you are not that person who ends up betraying that individual because you're angry. You're angry that they embarrassed you. You're angry that she didn't receive the help the way that you meant it to be received. Like, that turns nasty real quick, and it causes a whole level of drama that the academy has not addressed.
I think the perspective I was coming from was more from like the mentoring of like, how am I bringing people up and getting out of the way, rather than just sort of charging ahead and not being like thoughtful to who am I intentionally choosing to put into a position and supporting them. And so what you said, Monica, was really useful for me as a leader, of how am I putting people in the position to do the work, but yet not leaving them alone to have all of the strife that might happen when I do that.
Yeah, and you're bringing up something too, because I think when we're talking about recruitment, so this is going into a completely different space, and a reason that many people are disrespectful when it comes to recruitment, in my opinion, is that they do that. It's kind of like, oh, we know that we need a spot of color, in the environment, and they bring the person in, but then they just leave them there. And I feel that that's worse than just than just leaving them alone. And I feel like that, once again, I use the word abuse a lot, but I feel like that's a form of abuse, because that person's being set up to be hurt. Like, they have to do the regular requirements, but then they're also going to have to navigate a system where people don't think they should be there. And so you're putting the burden back on that individual again. And so we need to find more ways to not just recruit someone, but the thing I've even thought about, someone asked me, like, what lessons did I learn as a department chair, and what do I wish I would have had? I wish that there could have been some type of orientation. I think that when any leader comes in, I need to know where people are. And I'm not trying to accuse them, but if someone has never had a Black female professor, then surely they've never had a Black female supervisor. So we're dealing with a lot of stuff that people need to unpack. And so I'm ready day one to just say, hey, I'm up here ready to run a department, when we're dealing with historical things. We're dealing with stuff that I just don't even have the tools to engage with. And one thing that I've realized, and this is a term that I have used, is that I think that there are people who grieve. Like, in the academy, when there are changes, there's a grieving process. That's just what I call it, because of the changes. And I don't think that it's always on me to comfort people, because I expect to be included. So putting that out there is another thing. And I don't know if that makes sense to anyone, but you know what I'm saying? Like I predicted there's going to be a grieving process now. If there are changes that are happening, there are individuals on the other side who are going to be angry. Like, why is it that we're having to change? Why is it that we have these new policies? Why are resources being allocated in new ways? And so who is addressing that? Who's having that conversation? You can't just dump that off on a diversity officer that may or may not be faculty, who may or may not be in that department. You know, that's something that you need to equip the department chair with. That's something that you need to have a conversation with someone else about, because people are angry and there's nowhere for that anger to go. This is not going to be easy. That is my point. You know, we want to be kumbaya, Black Lives Matter. Okay, get ready, buckle up, because it's about to be rough. You're about to see people's hearts. You always do. Look at the civil rights movement. It is not easy.
I just want to acknowledge Dr. Hailu just messaged and said that she's got to step out. And so I'll give you the floor if you have any last words.
Yeah. Everyone who attended and for your active engagement. I don't want to interrupt the conversation. Anyone who's interested in continuing to engage. I do have a 12:30 meeting that I have to get to. I'm in Colorado now. So thank you. And again, Dr. Pollack has both of our contact information, and I can share the toolkit as well if you have any further questions for me.
I'm sorry, Ms. I feel like I took over. I just got caught up in my own thing, but thank you so much. I want to acknowledge you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And goodbye, everyone. It was nice seeing you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Ms.
I know Monica offered her last words some time ago, but any more questions for her? Well, I'll take a minute to thank you. One of the things I love and appreciate about you is your boldness and your courage to say what needs to be said. I know that you also get a lot of flack for that, and I hate that for you, but I think that you are changing the world and you're changing hearts and minds, and I'm grateful for you and what you offered to us today and what you offer to us and all the ways that you share and lead. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. You know, yeah, there's a movement that's happening, and I just hope that people want to be a part of it, because as I mentioned before, I just hope in our lifetimes that people don't have to endure what so many women of color have endured in the academy. And it's going to be hard work, and it's going to be uncomfortable for so many people, but these conversations need to happen. So thank you to everyone who's still here, you know, for the recording. Thank you so much. You know, be that, if I can encourage you to do anything, I encourage you to bring up these topics, like ask the difficult questions, even if people don't want to talk about them, because someone who may not be in the room with you needs you to speak up. They need you to have that voice. And, you know, getting back to my spirituality, I'm going to leave with that. You know, something that I've been telling people recently is that I've been reading this book by this author called Miles Monroe. And he talked about the wealthiest places in the world being cemeteries, and how there are songs that were never written. There are songs that were never written, composed. There were books that were never written. There are so many inventions that were never created because the wealth that people had in them are buried in the cemetery. And the thing that keeps me going is that at the end of my life, I don't want someone to say that I did not get every single thing out of me that I'm supposed to get out of me. And so that boldness that you talk about comes from the fact that I don't want to be on my deathbed and have regrets and say, I wish I could have said more. I wish I would have spoken up. I wish that I would have sacrificed a little bit of discomfort so that someone who's going to live 50 years after me can have a better life. And I just feel like that's the motivation for me doing this. And it comes with a lot of pain, but I don't want to have regrets. I don't. And so I am happy to speak out. I am happy to be that person. I am happy to help in any way that I can, because this is bigger than we are. And I just want people to understand that. Like, this is a moment. This is our lives, our one life to live. And we have to do what we can to make it count and make this world a better place. So that's why we do this. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Bree, do you want to wrap us up officially?
Yes. So once again, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. Um, like everything that you have talked about today, I truly aspire to be a leader in engineering education, like an administrator someday. So thank you so much for coming and talking about it, because I've had my own experiences that I don't feel comfortable sharing, but I appreciate you feeling comfortable enough to be honest with everybody who came today. So once again, thank you to both of you. And it was a pleasure meeting you. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week. And I also hope that everybody is inspired for, yes, today is June 10th. And I know that's the day that we're supposed to eradicate racism, but please make sure that it keeps going beyond June 10th.
Yeah.
This is much bigger than June 10th. So don't stop here. And please tell your colleagues that I said it, Dr. Cox said it, Megan said it, everybody said it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you.